Hi guys. So we are actually going to go out of order from the syllabus because I realized that I meant to change this and have this up front and sustainable governance at later. So I am updating that syllabus right now for you guys, and I'll send out an announcement. But we are going to do our love of stuff. So if you already read ahead for this week, that's fine. That's no big deal. Um, you're going to have to know it eventually anyways. And also a reminder that next week is our first exam, and that will include this lecture. When you log in for the exam next week, you're going to see a study guide and then the exam to take. So you'll have during the week to study from that study guide and during the week to take that exam, which you have to take in one sitting. But we are going to talk about stuff. We talked about waste, and we're going to talk about one of the reasons why we have so much waste. So again, a reminder, the basis for our whole class, profit, planet, people, right, are threefold, the triple bottom line. We're going to talk about the profit portion, which has a lot of effect on people and the planet. But this tends to be what things look like these days. The impetus behind what we have is kind of based upon profit, right? We live in a capitalist system. That's how our system works. We make things, we buy things. So when we think about capitalism and sustainability, this entire system is based upon growth and profits, right? It is generally speaking, not generally speaking, but corporations want to have growth and want to make profits. And so they want to be bigger than the year before. They want to make more money than the year before. If a corporation's if their growth is down from their projected growth, they will take a hit stock-wise. And one of the ways that they grow is by having cheaper means of production, right? So perhaps they can't sell any more shoes or t-shirts or televisions, but one of the ways they can grow that profit is to make that stuff more cheaply. And that doesn't mean to have less quality, although it certainly can. But what it means is to bring down those production costs. And those can lead to things such as environmental degradation. It often translates into poor working conditions. And we're going to see that throughout the rest of the semester. You're probably going to see it when you work on your final project. But, one of the things that we have to pay for in production is worker costs. And if we lower that, we're less likely to pay for things like health insurance for people or to make sure that they have safe and proper working conditions. And we generally do love our stuff. And by we, I'm including myself in this, right? I am also somebody who lives in the industrialized world. But the average household has 300,000 items. That's an incredible amount of items. US children make up 3.7% of the children on the planet, but have 47% of all toys and children's books, right? That's incredible. 3.7% of the children, but 47% of toys and children's books. The average British 10-year-old has 238 toys, but plays with 12 of them. As somebody with a small child, I can attest to the idea of having lots of toys, but only playing with a small portion of them. The average size of the American home has nearly tripled in size over the past 50 years. This I'm probably not a part of. I tend to live in very small places, but generally speaking, our homes are getting bigger. And one of the reasons our homes are getting bigger is because in that way they can hold more stuff. 1 out of every 10 Americans, in addition to having a larger place to live, now rents offsite storage for their stuff. And 25% of people with 2-car garages cannot park cars in them. They are just full of stuff. Right? And we go crazy for our stuff. We have holiday shopping has turned quite into a madness level event on Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, which often now starts actually on Thanksgiving or at midnight, with stampedes getting into the store to get that television that's at a lower cost. REI kind of did some pushback against that. They close on Black Friday. They started doing that a few years with their idea to opt outside, giving their employees the day off and telling you to go outside. I think Lyft this past year was giving free rides or heavily discounted rides, I can't remember which one, the day after Thanksgiving if you took it to a park to go hike, which is pretty impressive. We, as human beings, have even invented more holidays. In China, they've invented Singles Day, which is a day where you basically buy yourself something. It's become bigger, one of the biggest online shopping days of the year, right? $14.3 billion in sales from Singles Day. Amazon has Amazon Prime Day now, where we all kind of sit at our computers and just get all of this stuff. This has led to problems. Amazon has taken a lot of heat for workers' rights. These warehouses, when you order something from Amazon, people have to go and actually pick through these warehouses and get all that stuff and put it into the boxes. And the conditions in there can sometimes get extraordinarily hot depending where they are. In one place, they actually had ambulances outside because people were collapsing from the heat. And also, they're timed. They have very little time to go and pick these items, and it's repetitive. And generally speaking, they are not high quality, high paying jobs. We also love cheap clothes in the United States and in Europe. We buy on average 68 clothing items per year. That's an incredible amount of clothing items. We have something called fast fashion now, where you buy something that is really inexpensive at a place like H&M, and you wear it for maybe a season, and then there it goes. We buy on average 7 pairs of shoes a year. In 2009, Forever 21, that's a while ago, ordered 100 million garments. So again, this idea of this disposable fashion. And on average, we throw out 10 pounds of clothing every year. That is a lot of clothing. That is not always the case. Generally speaking, and I very much try to be part of this, people would buy clothes that were of higher quality, but that they loved and that they would wear for several years. Rather than, again, this disposable fashion. 99% of clothing and 98% of shoes are made outside of the US compared to 50% in 1990. 500,000 jobs are lost. Part of this is due to mechanization, but part of this is also due to cheaper labor in other places, often with poor working conditions, sometimes using child labor in order to make all of these clothes for us that are incredibly cheap. Only 20% of the clothes that we donate are sold in thrift shops. Most of them wind up in landfills. So it's not even like that clothing is getting recycled, right? There is a cost to all of these cheap clothes. There's a great documentary out there called The True Cost, which I used to show in my in-person sustainability class. And I highly recommend it to talk about kind of the problems associated with this fast fashion trend. But if you look at kind of the average cotton t-shirt, we produce enough cotton globally to make 15 t-shirts for every person on Earth. It takes 200,000 liters, or about 5,200 gallons of water, to make 1 kilogram or 2.2 pounds of cotton. And that is enough to make 1 t-shirt and 1 pair of jeans. So it's not only the labor, but it's also, there's a lot of environmental problems associated with that. Agriculture is the largest source of pollution in many countries. And a lot of that is going to grow cotton. 2.4% of the world's cropland is used for cotton. And that's cropland that could be potentially being used for food. So we are growing cotton, which is very water intensive, and then we are wearing the shirt for about a couple months, and then we are tossing it out. It uses 24% of insecticides and 11% of pesticides, which is an incredible amount. It's a very, very dirty process, and we do things like drain waterways in order to do that. This is the Aral Sea, which is in Asia. And so the Aral Sea was an inland sea that was fed by a river, and they created kind of irrigation off of it in order to grow cotton. It's a very arid place. You need a lot of water to grow cotton. And between 1989 and 2014, they completely drained this sea. This sea is like the size of Southern California, in order to irrigate this cotton. They didn't drain the sea itself because that was salty water, but they took away the source of water going into that sea. And they decimated an entire fishing community. because of that. There are literally ships just kind of stuck there that could not get out in time by the time it was drained, all to grow cotton. So again, then there is the bleaching and the dyeing and the manufacturing, all really environmentally dirty processes in order to make stuff that we are going to have for a very short time. And you say, like, well, at least it's biodegradable. Well, sort of, because when you put cotton like that into landfills, that are covered up and they don't have oxygen in there, that cotton is not really biodegrading. And then actually, usually it's a synthetic cotton blend. So very often now we do have 100% cotton t-shirts, but very often we're buying like a 50-50, or this is an 83-17, for example, but it's a cotton poly blend. And that polyester is made from oil, right? So it is not sustainable. Polyester has gone up production-wise. It has surpassed cotton. It is very, very cheap to make, but it's also a very, very dirty process, and it requires factories. In order to do that, we're not growing polyester, we're using oil in order to make that. And that is the drive of the cheap clothing boom. This relatively cheap availability of polyester from the process of using these fossil fuels. Some can be recycled, most of them are not. So most of them are going into landfills and they are not degrading at all. There is a trend now towards, for some part, plant-based synthetics like bamboo, but of course bamboo can also be produced really unsustainably. This is tencel, which is another one, which is made from a tree. And you are going to, I'm going to put the TED Talk afterwards, this link to this TED Talk after this, but this woman is working on growing fabrics out of algae, which is pretty unique. It's really just interesting to hear her talk about kind of the future of fabric and what does that look like, that we need to make these fabrics that are really, truly biodegradable. And we look at the economy of our stuff, right? The success of our economy is really based upon unlimited growth. And that's just not sustainable, right? We're concerned about sustainability in this class. It's not. We can't have unlimited growth forever. And companies now do this by selling bulk rather than quality, right? They're just trying to sell more things, more clothing, more phones, more TVs, rather than if you buy a cell phone, that cell phone is going to, odds are within a year or two, you're going to trade that cell phone in for the new cell phone. And they do that through advertising and wanting you to get that new cell phone, but they also do by making that cell phone that you had not work very well. But how did all of this stuff get so cheap in the first place? There's a few things that are going on here that allowed all of this stuff to just be very cheap. And a big one is post-colonial conditions. And so I'm going to explain what I mean by post-colonial conditions, but we all should know what colonialism is. I'm sure you've learned about it at some point in school, but basically European countries went out and colonized many parts of the world, kind of set up shop there as a way to extract natural resources. And so we're going to use England and India as an example. So England colonized India, and when they did, they exported cotton from India at discounted prices back to England. So they're ruling England. They're going to say, okay, we're going to export this cotton. There's going to be no tariffs. We're going to get it really cheaply, and it's going to go back to England. And then that cotton was used in England to manufacture goods, primarily clothing in England. And then those manufactured goods were then sold back to people in India at a markup. But what happened is England then controls a monopoly on these goods, which are more profitable than the raw materials, right? So generally speaking, you make more money selling a t-shirt than you make cotton, and that makes sense because there's a markup through the process. But this lays kind of the path for, I should say, natural resource-based economy. So many countries that were colonized, and India is kind of moving on to a more service sector economy in some ways, but they still make plenty of goods. But what happened is these economies were set up, even though they gained independence, their primary profit is based upon exporting often their natural resources to other places. And so now they're also exporting their labor essentially to other places. If we think about where your clothing is made, it is again not made in the United States. It is being exported from other countries. And what happens is that these countries, especially the ones that are exporting their natural resources, are really highly subject to external market force factors. So if somebody is just exporting coffee, that kind of international price of coffee can have a great effect. If you are exporting cotton, the international price of cotton can have a great effect on your average farmer. Um, and the other thing that we did, these post-colonial conditions, is basically that after um, countries gained independence, they needed money. They needed money to kind of get their countries off the ground, and they went to the IMF, which is the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, and said, "We need some money." And this was promoted as a way for them to get their economies going by outsiders. So they were lent money in order to get their economies going. And this debt that they incurred has been paid off many times over. But because of this export-based economy, they can't really pay off this debt. And so when they can't pay off this debt, and they go to the IMF and the World Bank and they say, we need our debt to be restructured, the IMF and the World Bank do that, but then they create something called structural adjustment programs. What these structural adjustment programs are is they say, okay, we're going to restructure your debt, but you need to do something for us. You need to have more free trade. So you need to not charge tariffs for these goods that you're exporting. You need to charge us lower taxes, right? You need to release all of these regulations. This is called neoliberalism. It does not have anything to do with what you would think of as typically liberal, but what it is kind of liberal economic policies where basically we want as much free trade as possible. And then coupled with that, with this global economic system is the pressure to buy on us, right? We are told that our economy literally depends on it. We measure the strength of our economy very often by the confidence of consumers and how much we are buying. We are also exposed to a glut of advertising constantly. I am going to have you watch videos in this class. You are probably going to get an advertisement off of YouTube for that first. They also create this false sense of urgency that we have to buy something now, either because it's going to disappear or that we desperately need it. And again, advertising works. There is a reason why they do it. It is very effective. Not to mention the pressure to buy things to be trendy or to be cool. But also, now there's a pressure to buy things just to have the technology to keep up. This is from a few semesters ago, one morning of ads from my inbox that I clicked on. This was right around Thanksgiving. And this is just what I woke up to, right? Amazon, Zappos, Patagonia, you can tell it all the places that I like to shop, right? And it's a big deal when somebody wears clothing twice. This is when Princess Kate, shortly after they were married, she wore a dress twice and it made headlines. What a trendsetter. She wore her clothes twice. So the question is like, how do we have sustainable capitalism? And we're going to talk more in depth about corporate sustainability later on, but like the main reason why corporations are interested in sustainability, which a lot of them are their positions in corporate sustainability. One is that sustainable practices can be more profitable. It is possible, so sometimes they're in it for that. From a public relations aspect, sustainability can equal added value. And so people are willing to pay more if you are able to for sustainably produced goods. And some companies have mission statements that are really centered around sustainability. Companies like Patagonia, who are their founders and their board are just generally very concerned about the concepts of sustainability and the environment, right? Patagonia came out with like, don't buy this jacket, right? They're having a zero growth model. They want people to kind of reuse their stuff, and Patagonia will recycle their goods and allow you to trade them in. Um, whoop. Some have concerns over the long-term sustainability of an industry, right? So they want to make sure that their industry can keep going. And then sometimes there's professional standards and norms. If you get enough people in an industry kind of following this process, others will kind of catch on. Greenwashing is problematic, though. That's when you deliberately use misleading terms to make something appear environmentally responsible that is not, which happens very often. I mean, 7-Up, I don't know if it still does, but 7-Up on the can a little while ago had all natural, right? 4,744 green projects in the USA and Canada were surveyed. 95% of them were found to be guilty of greenwashing, that they're not really sustainably produced. Maybe there's a tiny part of it that's sustainable, but we're going to slap that label on there anyways. For consumers, they have an interest in expanding their green lifestyle and sincere about their green personal ethic. There are lots of us who are trying to do the right thing and buy sustainably produced goods, but many see their green efforts as inadequate. So part of what I want you to come away with from this class is, while personal choice certainly does matter, a lot of it is about institutional change. And they recognize that companies are complex and must be looked at for their commitment to sustainability, right? It's not just that we can slap a label on that. Hopefully, there's something behind that. But being a green consumer is really time consuming. And some people do not simply have the time for that. If you think about trying to make all the best choices for food and clothing and products, that is very, very hard to do. You are going to watch a thing about the story of stuff, but basically it's going to talk about this kind of supply chain that happens where we extract stuff from the planet's natural resources, we produce goods, we then distribute those goods, we consume them in our home, and then we dispose of them in the landfill. And what this video is saying is we need to take that disposal and throw those materials back into production so we can stop extracting stuff from the planet. This is this cradle to the grave. Rather than going from cradle to grave, it's cradle to cradle mentality, right? We're to create a zero waste society. So you're going to watch that video. It's about 20 minutes long. And then you are going to answer a discussion question based upon that video. And that is the end of the lecture for this module.